Are you feeling overwhelmed by the amount of photography gear that is available nowadays? Because chances are, if you are a beginner photographer, you are going crazy about choosing the right photography gear and save money. Because let's be honest, photography, it's very expensive. And as a beginner, you may think that you need all the photography gear out there to be able to take good photos, but that's not true. And that's why I wanted to do this video. I'm going to show you today the essentials you need to get when you are just starting and which things you don't need, okay? Because it can get very blurry sometimes and it's normal that you get confused because many of us as a professional, we have a lot of gear, but we didn't start that way, okay? We started with one camera and one lens. So today I'm gonna divide the video in 3 sections. I'm gonna put timestamps below, but I highly encourage you to watch the whole video because you are going to learn a lot from my mistakes as well when I started photography 15 years ago. So the first section would be the essentials you need 100% as a beginner photographer. The second section would be about the things you don't need and you can skip. And the third section, which is very important, is about future investments that you can make as a photographer, okay? Let's start with essentials. These are the items you can't go without as a beginner. The first one would be a camera body. I'm going to tell you in a second a very unpopular advice to what everyone else is recommending you, okay? When I started in photography 15 years ago, I knew I wanted to buy a camera, but I wasn't too sure about photography yet. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna invest in a compact camera because I was very lazy and I couldn't see myself changing lenses. That was my thought by then. And my parents, they were doing photography as a hobby. And I remember my mom told me, Laura, you are going to regret because if you like photography, you are wasting, I think it was like 400, 500 euros by then. You are wasting that money because I'm sure you are going to want a DSLR later. And I say to my mom, I don't want to change lenses. A compact camera is more than enough for me. And my mom told me again, Laura, you're going to waste money because it's between 400 and 500 euros anyway, which is expensive. And you're going to want a DSLR later. And I was so convinced I wouldn't want it. After a week using the compact camera, I went to my mom and I said, Mom, you were right. I really want a DSLR because once you get into photography, it sucks you in. Okay? You get super competitive with yourself, you want to get better, you want more from your gear, and a compact camera was super limited by then. So I wasted that money because not long after I bought my first DSLR. I will tell you later which one. So that's why the unpopular advice I'm going to give you is that if you can, please, even if you have to wait a bit longer, save money and get a decent camera body. I would tell you to buy a mirrorless camera right away, no doubt. I don't want you to have to upgrade after just a few months or 1 year, because that money, it's going to the bin. Maybe you can sell the camera, of course, but not for the same price. So my very honest advice is that if you can save a little bit of money, get something good enough so you don't have to upgrade that quick. Okay? Unless you are super sure like this is just a hobby and you just want to experiment. Then you are free to do whatever. And nowadays, all of them are very good. You don't need the best ones, okay? I started with a Canon 30D. That one was 8 megapixels. Then I've got the Canon 7D, which was 19 megapixels. And then I sold my car, and trust me, I worked so hard to have that card when I was 18 years old. I was so attached to it because it's been with me for more than a decade. I sold it to buy my Canon 5D Mark IV with a couple of lenses. And that was very painful, but I've never regretted it because I love photography. And I still have my Canon 5D Mark IV. I love that camera. I couldn't sell it. I still keep it. I love that camera. And then before coming to Bali, for those new here, I moved from London to Bali, but obviously I'm not from London, I'm Spanish. I have a whole story that you will be able to find out on my channel. But yeah, after moving to Bali, I switched to Sony, and now I have the Sony a7R V, which is 61 megapixels, and I have the Sony a7C II, which I upgraded not long ago from my Sony a7C. And if you want to know why I switched from Canon to Sony after 14 years with Canon, There is a video on my channel explaining why. I'm gonna link it somewhere here, and it's not what you think, because I was a very happy Canon girl. I was very happy with Canon. I miss Canon a little bit, but it's out of nostalgia because I became a full-time freelance photographer and creative director in London with Canon gear, but I'm not looking back. I'm very happy with Sony. That doesn't mean that you have to get Sony. And the brand doesn't matter. If you feel like going for Canon, go for Canon. It's very good. If you feel you want to try Sony, go for Sony. Fujifilm, it's incredible as well. Even Lumix nowadays, it's getting better and better. Any camera nowadays is gonna make the job, okay? So just think about the brand that you are gravitating to. I was gravitating to Canon and I bought Canon. And then after 14 years, I gravitated to Sony and I've got Sony. But I'm not in this fight of Sony is better, Canon is better, Fujifilm is better. I think it's ridiculous, those kind of conversations online. Every single brand, it's amazing nowadays. Every brand, it's going to have its pros and cons, okay? So just choose whichever and don't go too crazy with this. So the second essential would be a lens. I became a full-time freelance photographer with one lens, a kit lens, a 15-85mm from Canon by then. It wasn't the best quality ever, but it did the job and it was very versatile. Because in that range, I was able to shoot product photography, landscape photography, portrait photography. So there are two options for you, and this is going to be entirely up to you and your photography niche. The first one, which is my favorite one, is a zoom lens. Why? Because if you are a beginner, chances are that you didn't experiment with many niches yet. And trust me, you may think you just want to do portrait, but then you never know. Because I started with sharp action shots and that's it. I didn't want to touch any other niche. A bit of landscape, to be honest, but that's it. I would never think I would become a creative portrait photographer. So please be open-minded about this. So what I did is getting the zoom lens I told you about. I highly recommend you a 24-105 if you can afford just one lens. Again, this is my opinion, because 24, it's enough for landscape photography, and 105, it's amazing for portrait photography and for close-ups, maybe some wildlife. Still a bit short, but 105 is zoom enough. So with that lens, you're going to be able to shoot whatever you want. So that's a focal range I would recommend. Then the second option would be to get a prime lens. These obviously are the best of the best. I love prime lenses, I do have a few. And a 50mm is very affordable and is quite versatile. But I do have to say that I love my 35mm. Because with 50mm, if you want to do landscape, it's too tight. But with 35mm, it's not as bad when you have a full frame camera. So again, that's why I told you, this depends on your photography niche. So if you're going for portrait photography, maybe think about the 50mm. But if you want to experiment, which I highly encourage you to do, a zoom lens, it's the best thing ever. You can even get a kit lens, a cheap one, because nowadays, even a cheap lens, it's gonna do the job, okay? And it's not gonna be bad. The next thing would be memory cards. This is not as fun because you always get excited when you buy a camera or a lens, but when you buy a memory card, you are like, okay, it's just a memory card, and they're actually freaking expensive. But make sure you buy two. This is essential because maybe it can get corrupted or it can get completely full during one of your photo shoots, and more if you are a beginner because you tend to shoot way more. We all overshoot when we start as a photographer. And make sure the capacity is big enough and the reading speed, because nowadays with the powerful cameras we have, you need a high reading speed and also high capacity. This one is 61 megapixels, this beast here. So the files take a lot of space. So I had to get very powerful and expensive SD cards because it records up to 8K, even though I don't use it, I record 4K all the time. But the files are very big because it's 61 megapixels. So I made sure I've got amazing SD cards. I'm gonna put them down below, but you may not need this yet, okay? Because this camera requires a lot. So make sure the SD cards you buy are enough for your camera, but don't fall too short, because this is another mistake I did. I do have more SD cards, but I cannot use them with this camera. If I would have invested time ago in a better one, I wouldn't have spent what I spent in SD cards. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Like, sometimes it's better to invest rather than buying something cheap, which is not cheap anyway, and then buying the expensive thing, because you end up overspending. So pay attention to these things as well. And the next essential, which I wasn't sure if putting it on the list or not, is a tripod. As a beginner for me, I knew I needed a tripod because I was doing surf photography and also landscape. So I knew I needed it, okay? But if you are doing just portrait photography or street photography, you may not need it yet, but I highly encourage you to get it because if suddenly you want to do long exposures at night, you are going to need a tripod. So I would recommend you to buy a tripod as a beginner to experiment within many niches. And if you want something very light, that is not bulky, not heavy, has a very big load capacity and it's very easy to carry, I'm going to put the one I use below. It's a travel tripod and it's the only one I could bring all the way from London to Bali. And it's the only one I've been using for everything. Self-portrait photography, travel photography, to record my videos. I'm using it right now. And it's very small and very lightweight. And you're going to have a 10% discount, by the way. It's more pricey than other tripods. But if you are like me and you don't want to carry a chunky tripod and heavy tripod everywhere, for me, it's worth every penny. This is up to you. If you want to take a budget tripod, you can do it in Amazon. There are plenty of them. But in case you want to invest in a good one, I'm gonna put mine below. And the next thing would be something which is as essential as knowing how to take good photos, which is basic editing software. I'm going to recommend what I know. If I don't know editing software, because I know there are a few out there, I'm not gonna recommend it. Not because I think they are bad, but because personally, I didn't try them. So the one I've been using since I started photography my whole life, it's been Lightroom and Photoshop, obviously. For me, Lightroom is the king and that's it, okay? You can do whatever you want with Lightroom and I love it. But if you don't want to pay subscription, there is another software I use which is called Luminar Neo. I've been using Luminar Neo for years, but I use it as a plugin for Lightroom, but it works as a standalone software as well. I do have tutorials about Luminar Neo on my channel if you want to take a look, but it's a very cheap option if you are a beginner, and I'm gonna put a discount code below as well. And the third option, this is something I don't recommend you unless you're a portrait photographer and you really want to be amazing at portrait photography, because this editing software, and I don't have a discount for this one, it's called Aperty, but it's just for portrait photography. That's it. You are completely limited. And I switched from Luminar Neo to Aperty because I already have Lightroom. So all the tools Luminar Neo has, I already have them in Lightroom. So I don't need Luminar Neo. I was using the portrait features of Luminar Neo, but now Aperty, it's like Luminar Neo portrait features on steroids. This video is not a sponsor at all, but I do have a video which is actually sponsored by Aperty. I'm gonna link it somewhere here. Even if you don't do portrait photography, I encourage you to watch the video, just for you to understand in which point we are at when it comes to editing software as a photographer. It's insane. So I don't recommend you this one unless you're a portrait photographer or a professional portrait photographer. If you're a beginner, Lightroom or Luminar Neo. And the next thing is quite fun. We all love camera bags, and it's kind of impossible to get just one. As a beginner, yes, 100%. But then when your needs are changing and they change a lot, you're going to need more camera bags. And that's totally fine because I do have different camera bags for each occasion. For when I go on the plane and I have to carry all my photography gear with me, then my daily carry camera bag, even a handbag I have, which is very discreet, and I just want to carry one lens or two. So you have a full video about this, so I'm not gonna go in depth. I'm gonna link it down below as well for you to check it out. You are going to learn a lot about your needs with camera bags, so I highly encourage you to watch it. But the only thing I would say today is don't buy a very small one because you just have one camera and one lens, okay? Because, again, after a few months, when you get a second lens, you are going to need to buy another camera bag. So please think a bit about the future, because this is such a beginner mistake. I did it as well with the camera, as I told you before, and then we regret because you end up spending more money. So at least get a camera bag that fits 3 lenses, I would say. I wouldn't say even 2, I would say 3. Unless you are super sure you just want 2 lenses or 1 lens. Think about the future always when you are buying photography gear. Let's go to the second section of the video, which is the gear you don't need right away. The first thing you don't need is a very expensive telelens. If you can afford it, go for it, because the satisfaction it gives you when you take a photo with this baby It's incredible. This one is the 70-200 f2.8 G Master, the second version from Sony, and I couldn't be happier with this lens. I actually have a full video in Bali where I challenged myself to shoot just with this lens. So you didn't watch it yet, go check it out because I'm sure you're going to love it. So if you know that you want to dedicate yourself to wildlife photography, sports photography or something like that, and you can afford it, maybe go for it. But if not, there are so many zoom lenses nowadays, so you don't need to go for the super good ones unless you can afford them. And the second thing would be expensive camera bodies. I have the Sony a7R5. This is so expensive, but I've been doing photography 15 years. I told you already all my camera trajectory, let's say. It's been cheap, average, expensive. We all go through there. Well, maybe not everyone because people have money out there. I didn't. So I had to be escalating as my business was growing. At the beginning, it was just a hobby. So you don't need a super expensive camera from the very beginning unless you can afford it. Go for it because it's gonna last for years. I don't change cameras all the time. I was with my Canon 30D, I don't even know for how many years. Same thing with my Canon 7D, same thing with my Canon 5D Mark IV, like years and years shooting with it. I didn't need the last of the last to shoot, okay? Then you become a bit geeky because if you love photography, we all become geeky and we want more things, which is normal. It's our hobby, it's our passion, and in my case as well, it's my job. So I got the Sony a7R5, but you don't need an expensive body from the very beginning. But as I told you before, don't take a very cheap camera body either, okay? Try to be average, so then you don't have to upgrade that quick. The third thing you don't need is flashes or complex lighting gear, unless you want to get into studio photography, like me. But there are many ways to make this affordable. I do have a few videos on my channel, but the most recent video I did about it, I help you choose the right photography lighting for your studio, okay? You can go check it out later if you want to get into this. But on my channel, if you know me already, I always encourage you to start with one light. I shoot with one light. I have many, and I shoot most of the times with one because you can get super creative anyway. And I also have videos about this on my channel about creative lighting with just one light. One light, one softbox, one light stand, and you are sorted. And it sounds expensive, but it's not, because there are many affordable lighting gear out there. But you don't need this from the very beginning unless you are doing studio photography. And you don't need every photography accessory under the sun, okay? There are battery grips, remote triggers, filters. You don't need that yet. I didn't even work with remote triggers for so long. I was just plugging the cable to my camera, like old school. I didn't care. I didn't have to spend the money because I was shooting in my home photography studio, so I didn't need the remote trigger. Of course, it's more comfortable, but I wasn't too bothered about that. So don't waste the money on things like this, okay? As a beginner, then all you want, because we all want to improve. Let's go now to the third section of the video, which is the smart investments for the future. The first one would be obviously a second lens, because after you nail the essentials I told you about and you practice photography, you are going to know what you miss in terms of focal ranges. So you're going to be able to know already which second lens you want, because you're going to know better your niche and you're going to see what do you like the most shooting. So a second lens would be one of the first things I want you to invest on. And the second one would be filters. I love my filters, okay? If you know my work, I use filters all the time. Even right now, I'm using a mist filter, so everything looks like more dreamy. Like this light here is very diffused. It's because I'm using a mist filter. I love mist filters because it makes everything more cinematic and filmy. So this is optional, but I like them and I use them. And then ND filters. I love shooting long exposure photography, landscape photography. So the water looks more silky. Obviously, you have to use a tripod, and the ND filters are cutting stops of light, so you can achieve this. So this is optional, but again, maybe it's essential for you if you like long exposure photography from the very beginning. So for me, in a way, it's essential, but it's something you can live without when you are just starting as a photographer. And the next thing you have to invest on is in external hard drives or SSDs. Okay, I wanted to put it in essential because otherwise you're going to have to unload all your photos in your laptop and it's gonna fill up pretty quick. So this is entirely up to you. External hard drives are way cheaper than SSDs, but SSDs are less fragile, they are very tiny and portable, and they have a very high reading speed. So I'm editing 4K video out of my SSDs and my photography out of my SSDs. I plug them and I'm editing from them. I don't have my stuff stored on my MacBook Pro. So this is very beneficial, but they are very expensive. So if you cannot afford it yet, go for a normal hard drive. But this is very important because you have to have backups of your photography work. Not in one place, in a few places, if possible, okay? Because if you do it in just one place and the hard drive fails, you are left with nothing, and we've been all there, I think, as a photographer. So make sure with time you get a few ones and you back up all your photography work. I'm going to put below the links to the videos I've been telling you about during today's video, and they are going to help you further. And also the link to my photography gear for you to see everything I have, but it took me 15 years to get it. So please think just about the essentials. But maybe you want to take out my SD cards or my hard drives, you're gonna have everything linked below. And please let me know below if you are thinking about buying something in particular, and I will try to help you if I can. And subscribe to my channel if you didn't yet, and I will see you in the next one. Big love from Bali. Mwah.